Hi, my name is Lindsay. I'm a 19-year-old female living in Pennsylvania with my parents and two sisters. We live in a rural area, and there isn't much that goes on out here. I listen to your stories every morning at work and always wished I had a scary story of my own to share. Well, tonight I got my scary story. To preface the story a bit, me and my older sister have only been hiking one time before this experience, so we are by no means pros. We do, however, always bring some items for safety such as pocket knives, flashlights, and a medical kit. For this story, I will not use my sister's name for the sake of their anonymity. My older sister will be called Mary, and my younger sister will be referred to as Felicia. So, today's Felicia's birthday, and she's never been hiking before. We figured we would bring her on a little hiking trip to take advantage of the beautiful weather. The area we hiked at prior is part of the state game lands. Hikers are permitted on the mountain trails during the off-season of hunting. However, not many folks know about this spot because there are no signs or anything until you walk the mile or so into the woods. By then you reach a small parking lot of sorts, which is always empty. There are two main trails that are marked with the occasional blue dot on a nearby tree. If not for these spray paint dots to mark the path, you might not even know it's a trail because of how little use these paths see. Probably not the best first hiking spot for a couple of newbies like us, I know, but it's super close to us and makes for a quiet hike with lots of scenery. So, we decided to once again hike that trail because we were somewhat familiar with it. We were decently excited and ready to have a nice relaxing hike through the mountain and hopefully get some cool pictures. We started walking from our house all the way to the bottom of the mountain where we would begin our hike. On our way there, we were telling F about the trail and how beautiful it was. M then expresses concern that there could be animals of all sorts nearby because the area isn't normally frequented by many humans. I figured there would be animals, of course. It is the woods after all, but I never imagined anything like what I'm about to describe in this story. After walking for about 15 minutes, we reach the parking lot. M leads the way with me in the middle, and Felicia following closely behind. The first couple of steps onto the trail require you to walk up a small but steep hill. Mary crested the hill before Felicia and me, and as she did, we heard a loud rustling noise off to our left. I naturally chalked the noise up to some birds, or maybe a squirrel messing around in a tree. But then Mary suddenly stopped in her tracks, causing F and I also to pause briefly. Just as I was about to ask what the problem was, M calmly turned and said, "Turn around, guys." I and F just looked at her confused, not understanding what she meant. I just started asking why, and she said probably the scariest thing I've ever heard. "There's something over there. Run!" Now, that sentence was a lot scarier for me and Felicia because we know Mary very well, and she doesn't scare easily. So, to hear the clear panic in her voice as she ordered us to run away from something that neither Felicia nor I saw was terrifying. Em and Felicia immediately started sprinting back down the small hill as I was still standing in my place. I quickly looked behind me, but I saw nothing. I did hear something though. I was still very confused because I hadn't seen anything, and Mary never said what she saw. I ran over to Mary and Felicia, who were waiting for me just before the entrance to the parking lot. I think part of the reason I hesitated to run right away was that I thought Mary might be exaggerating a little. I should have known by the look on her face that she was not messing around. I had a miniature hatchet multi-tool and a pocket knife on my belt, and you better believe I had them at the ready. I had no idea what I was expecting, but I knew whatever might run out of the woods behind us was going to get a face full of stainless steel. When I reached my sister's, I asked Mary what exactly we were running from. She just told us to keep moving as she constantly looked back at the trail we had just come from. She even told us to jog just in case it was following us. We did. After maybe jogging a quarter of a mile or so, Mary finally told us what we were running from. She said she looked in the direction of the noise we had all heard, and what she saw was a gray figure, hunched over about 10 feet off the trail. She described it as being at least the height of Felicia, who was around 5'6". She said it looked to be bipedal, but she didn't stick around long enough to take in every detail about the figure. However, she did note that it looked as if it was shuffling towards us. I believe that's what made her get us out of there so fast. She must have feared that we were being chased. Now, I never have believed in monsters or cryptids or anything, but Mary said she honestly had no idea what the thing was. We don't have any type of animals in Pennsylvania that matches that description, at least as far as I know. I know the black bears stand on their hind legs sometimes, but they're not gray, and it didn't sound big enough to be a bear. The only other thing it might have been was a human. But why would someone hear us obviously distressed and not call out to let us know they were there, and that they didn't pose a direct threat, unless the person was not there as a friendly hiker? Possibly a person living on the mountains, maybe someone doing drugs and was afraid they would get busted. I don't know. That seems to be the only logical explanation, but I'm not fully convinced it was a person. I don't believe in Bigfoot or anything, but who knows? By the time we were almost home, Mary told us that she used to go to the bus stop with 2 of the neighbor kids years ago. She said they would always talk about a mystery animal that they would see walking around in the woods near their house, which is very close to the state game lands. At first, she didn't believe them because she had never seen such a thing, but one time when the neighbor kid's grandmother was with them at the bus stop, Mary asked about this mystery animal. The grandmother is and has always been a religious person. Didn't seem to be the type of person to believe in something like her grandkids had explained, but to Mary's surprise, the grandmother said she had also witnessed the mystery animal lurking around. What's more, our house is just across the lawn from where our neighbors claim to spot this unknown creature. I'm not sure if these 2 experiences are related. Besides, that was years ago. But could the figure M encountered in the woods tonight be the mystery animal? Maybe it was a human or an animal. Who knows for sure? But what I do know is, I don't think we'll be hiking on the state game lands anytime soon. One day, my best friend and I were taking a shortcut to her house. It goes past a few houses and through a small area of woods, crossing a 2-foot wide creek. This particular day, I was wearing one of those jackets that had earbuds as the strings, a must-have item as a 5th grader in 2010. As we were passing one of the houses, a couple large dogs come running from it, jumping on us and obviously just wanting to play. The owner of the house comes out, and I noticed right away that he was acting really fidgety and nervous, saying stuff about the dogs like, "Oh, it's okay, they're nice, don't worry." We made small talk with him about the dogs for a few minutes, turned around to leave. About a minute or so later, we arrived at the small creek, when I noticed that one of the rubber earbuds that was on my jacket was gone, and I insisted on going back to look for it. The guy came back out again and offered to help us. He asked what the material was made of, and I said it was made of rubber. We made small talk again. I think about the jacket and how cool it was. Anyway, he said he was going to be right back with his metal detector. He walked away towards his shed and I said to my friend, Why does he need a metal detector? The earbud is made of rubber. Next thing you know, he's coming back with, I shit you not, a rifle, and he's literally running towards us. When I'm telling you we ran, we ran. When we got back to safety past the creek and near her house, I was telling her we needed to call 911. She insisted that we do not do that because her parents would be mad at her. I explained to her with urgency why it's important we call the police, but she refused and I couldn't force her. I didn't call because I didn't want to do it alone, plus it would have been my first time calling them. I can't remember when or if I told my parents that night what happened, but when I told them, they gaslit me, said I was crazy overreacting, and that I really didn't see that. I still think about this damn near every day and it haunts me. The second time was, again in 5th grade, after the first story, but I'm not sure how long after. The friend from the previous story lived near a cemetery, about a 5-mile walk from her house. It was a large cemetery and we liked to walk around a lot. Plus behind the cemetery was a shortcut through the woods to a big park, which was coincidentally right next to our school. This day we were also with another good friend of ours. We were just walking around the cemetery this day when all of a sudden a blue truck pulls up next to us in the road next to where we were walking, about 10 feet or so away. I could see 2 guys were in it, literally just staring at us, and I again got that weird feeling that I had gotten with the previous guy. This is hard to explain, but right before the shortcut in the woods is a fence with a cutout that leads to a field of grass, and a hill next to it that leads into the neighborhood of where my other friend lived. The hill was really a bunch of dead grass, weeds, sticks, cattails, etc. Anyway, I told my friends I had a bad feeling about these guys, that they were staring at us and quite literally slowly following us with the truck. We booked it to that grass field and through that hill. I had all sorts of cuts and gashes from all the shit that we were running through. When we got to the top of the hill, we turned around and the truck was parked at the top of the hill on the other side, with both men outside holding rifles. I truly believe they were coming after us, and that they were visibly mad that we got away from them. I knew they were after us because they would have had to driven through the cutout in the fence, amongst the gut feelings and just the entire situation. We ran to my friend's house, noticed her parents, who truly didn't seem too worried, and drove my other friend and me home. I don't even remember if I told my parents about this time, since they gaslit me when I told them last time. I just can't shake the fact this shit really happened when I was in 5th grade and 10 years old. I also can't believe how lightly my parents took the situation. I'm honestly traumatized about what happened, and I think about it often. I just needed to tell some people what happened before I have trouble getting my thoughts into words. When I was about 8 years old, there was this pasture not too far from my house where a lot of neighborhood kids would go and play. On this particular day, it was only me and my 2-year-old sister out there. After a while of us playing with the rocks, I noticed this teal sedan pull up about 10 to 15 feet away from where we were. I looked to see who it was and saw an older man. I didn't recognize him. He was wearing dark sunglasses, but clearly watching us from the driver's seat as his face was turned directly towards us. We just kept playing for another 5 or so minutes, with a few glances at the car here and there, until I heard the car door open. I looked up and my eyes were met with that old guy walking around the trunk of his car. He smiled at me, and that's when I noticed that he wasn't wearing pants. I immediately grabbed my baby sister and booked it home. I told my oldest sister, who sprinted outside ready to claw that man's eyes out. But surprise, surprise, the pervert had already left. My sister told my mom, who then called the police. The officers were very nice and helped reassure me that I wasn't in trouble for seeing what I did. I gave them the best description of the man that I could, and they hurried out to try and find me. My older sister reminded me about this disturbing detail I told the police, which I must have blocked out of my mind. Apparently, I told them that the man was leaned back in the driver's seat for a little bit, and I saw him shaking, which made every adult in the room shudder. I don't believe they ended up catching the guy, or if they did, I didn't hear about it. Thank you guys for watching and listening to the very end. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please make sure to do so now. And please leave a like on the video, as it helps perform at a much higher level. If you want your story featured on an upcoming video, send it to my email in the description box below. And until we meet again, stay sinful.
This story happened a few years ago. I was in my early 20s and was studying in Paris, France. I was going home from uni. I usually took a short bus ride and walked the rest of the way. That day, I felt slightly uncomfortable though. I could sense some guy looking intensely at me. I was used to unpleasant, unsolicited gazes, but this time his gaze felt sort of beastly. It's hard to explain why, but I felt like a prey being stalked. I decided to get off the bus a few stops early. I wanted to avoid him and didn't want him to see where I usually got off. Like I learned in the movies, I waited until someone else pressed the stop button and waited until the last moment to stand up and leave. I didn't notice him get off the bus though. Just as I was feeling the relief of having escaped an uncomfortable situation, I looked over my shoulder and there he was, a few meters behind me. I had the distressing feeling his eye had just looked away the moment that I turned. I walked into a shop quickly, took my phone and pretended to be taking a call, and when I couldn't see him anymore, I exited and made my way home as fast as I could. I kept looking back on the busy street. I zigzagged across the street at every crossing, and finally I believed that him getting off at the same stop as me was just a coincidence. When I reached my building, I looked back one last time, and there he was again, his alarming gaze on me, smirking. I ran up to my apartment, climbing the stairs 4 at a time. I reached the top floor, squeezed through my door, locked it, and froze. My intercom was now ringing. Don't ask me why I picked it up. I regretted it the moment that I did, but I could hear the opposite flat intercom ringing as well. He had pressed all the buttons one by one, hoping that someone would open, but now he knew my name. Gabriel. I felt like a deer in the headlights, frozen. "Open the door, please," said a pleading voice. "I just want to talk to you." Somehow, I couldn't even move or speak. "Come to the window," he added. "Look at me. You'll see I'm not a bad guy." Something clicked. He wanted to locate my apartment in the building. I was not going to make that mistake, though. I hung up in shock. I waited by the door without moving for what seemed like hours. When I finally managed to calm myself, I called my long-distance boyfriend. "Call the police," he said immediately. Why didn't I call the police? I don't know. Today, it would be the first thing that I would do. The fear of making a big deal out of something not important, perhaps. What an idiot I was, though. I called my best friend instead. I just didn't want to feel alone, I guess. I told her all about it, and after a while, I felt a bit safer. We started laughing, and suddenly the intercom rang again. 2 hours had passed since I'd come home. I answered. "Gabriel," said the voice. "Open, please." I still remember the chills that I felt that day. He was still there. He was there all this time. I was silent, petrified. He was silent, but I could sense his trepidation. "Gabriel, let me in. I'm so thirsty," he said. "Just give me a glass of water." This broke the tension, and I hung up. Curled up in a corner, literally in recovery position, terrified, I waited. I was scared to make a sound. I knew that he couldn't hear me from the hall, but I was scared to even breathe. The intercom rang again, and again. I didn't answer this time. Instead, I crouched to the sofa and just fell asleep in exhaustion. But I did hear the intercom ring one more time, in the middle of the night. I woke up in the morning, afraid to leave my apartment. I called my dad, who came to pick me up. There was no one in the hall, but there was a note in my mailbox. It said, "Gabriel, I'm a nice guy. You should have opened to me." We immediately went to the nearest police station, and the police listened, and of course they told me that I should not hesitate to call them. My dad called a locksmith to install digicode on the building door the same day, and wrote a message to each of my neighbors asking to not open the door to anyone that they didn't expect. He sat in the cafe in front of my building with two friends every evening for more than a week, but I never saw the stalker again. After this episode, I use a different route to and from uni every day. I kept my phone tightly in my hand and looked back every few meters. Today, I'm still very observing of my surroundings. I never enter the door if I'm not expecting someone. So, people, if you ever find yourself in any kind of uncomfortable situation like this, trust me, call the police. And don't be an idiot like me. I haven't really told a lot of people about this story, but it's still one of the scariest things that I've ever experienced. Maybe someone here can shed some light on what you think this was. So, in 2018 to 2019, I was dating this guy, and I would always sleep over at his place on the weekends. I would sleep on the right side of the bed, and he would sleep on the left side. And one night, I woke up because I guess I could feel something staring at me. I opened my eyes, and my boyfriend was sitting on the edge of the bed, to my right, just sort of staring at me and smiling, but the way he looked was so creepy. Nothing different about how he looked, but the only way that I can explain it is sort of, well, evil. Like super big smile and really wide eyes, just sort of staring at me, but not saying anything. Now, this guy would always mess with me and joke around, so I thought that he was just trying to freak me out or something. I was about to ask him what he was doing too, like the words were about to come out, when all of a sudden I felt his body laying down, asleep, heard him breathing deep to the left of me. I immediately knew that whatever this thing was that was staring at me was not my boyfriend. I stopped myself from saying anything or even looking at my actual boyfriend lying next to me. I was still looking right at whatever this thing was that I had thought was my boyfriend. And I had an overwhelming sense of just feeling like I was in danger, and if I said anything or looked at my boyfriend to my left, that it would know that I knew that it wasn't my boyfriend and something bad was about to happen. All of this was going through my mind super fast, like it was maybe 3 seconds after I realized that my boyfriend was actually asleep to my left, that I just quickly grabbed the comforter, closing my eyes, and threw it over my head while turning, grabbing hold of my real boyfriend. And I just stayed like that until I fell back asleep eventually from exhaustion. Now, I've had sleep paralysis before, a couple of times in fact, and I know how it feels. And this was definitely not sleep paralysis. I still remember every detail so vividly, and to this day, I have no idea what that was. So this happened almost 10 years ago, but it still gives me the creeps whenever I think about it. I was finished college, living back with my parents in our sleepy little town, and had rekindled an old friendship from high school to pass my days. Madison was a chill girl, and I got along pretty well with her boyfriend and brothers, so I ended up spending a fair amount of time over there at her place. Madison's mum was a nurse who enjoyed training for marathons, so if she wasn't at work, she was usually out running. Her dad, on the other hand, was off on disability and home every day, except for delivering the paper around the neighborhood at about 4 a.m. Through passing conversation with Madison, I learned that he had been a professor before going off work, but I didn't feel it was my place to inquire further than that. He was never anything but pleasant to me during our interactions, but I was always struck with the notion that he seemed very distracted by something, as if there was always another conversation happening that he needed to return to. My parents are the type who always have questions about my friends, even if I was a 22-year-old college student. So I filled them in on what I knew and where I had been spending my afternoons. My mum asked me if I knew what her dad was off on disability for. I told her I didn't know, at which point my dad piped up and said that he believes that he deals with some mental illness. He then gently explained that he had responded to a 911 call with the volunteer fire department to go retrieve Madison's father out of the garage after a failed, attempt. Hearing that, my heart went out to everyone involved, and my questions surrounding her dad were satisfied, I guess. But I continued hanging around with Madison and her family for the rest of the summer, never having any issues besides perhaps a hangover the next day. One night, though, we were all over at Madison's house celebrating someone's birthday, I think. Everyone was congregating in the kitchen, sharing snacks, drinking wine, dancing. Even Madison's parents were down and having a good time with us. But her dad came over to me calmly with his drink and asked if he could speak to me in another room just off of the kitchen. I agreed and followed him, thinking that he was probably going to ask me to move my car or something. When we got into the other room, I could see the concerned look on his face, though, and became a little bit worried, hoping that I hadn't done something wrong or something. Amanda, I don't mean to scare you, but my paper route is through your neighborhood, and I saw something the other night. While I was heading down your street, I noticed a man coming towards me on the other side of the road. I don't usually see anybody else out there early, so I was a little bit surprised, but as he got closer, I noticed that he had no feet. He made eye contact with me as he said the last part, and I could tell that he was being serious. Look, I had no idea what to do, and I just froze, and he just sort of, floated on past. He said with a dramatic arm wave. He then began to shake his head as if saying no. Anyways, I think it's a Reaper, and I just thought that you should know, okay? He made eye contact with me again, but smiled sweetly. I sort of picked my jaw up off the floor and managed to thank him for letting me know, and he nodded dutifully, and we went back into the other room, rejoining the party. I told Madison about it later on in the evening, just as she would want to know what was going on, I guess, with her dad and all, and she seemed embarrassed, but not surprised by this information, and told me to ignore her dad because he was crazy. Her dad carried on as usual around me after that, and never brought it up again with me. After I finished college and moved out, Madison and I sort of lost touch, and I really don't think about her that often, but I do, however, always check to make sure that people have feet when I'm out walking in the early morning hours. I don't know what it was about that story that got to me, but he seemed so genuine. I don't know. What do you guys think? I was at my aunt's house in 2003. Decided to spend the night and hang out with my cousins and all. My aunt lived in a house built around about the 1930s, or thereabouts anyway. And the day was normal. Watching movies, talking nonsense, all that cool teenage stuff that you do when life feels carefree, right? Well, fast forward to nighttime and everybody goes off to bed. I was just hitting the couch that night and was still up watching TV and texting my girlfriend. The couch that I was sitting on was centered in the living room, so you could walk around it. The living room itself was quite large, with a high ceiling and chandelier in the middle. I remember my girlfriend saying that she was going to brush her teeth before bed, so I started to play games on my phone while waiting for her to text me back. In that time, I must have dozed off, but I woke up with what seemed like minutes later, still holding my phone in front of me. TV was still on, but I could see a faint reflection in the screen of my phone of an old woman standing behind me. I instantly turned to look, but when I did, there was nothing there. I felt uneasy and ended up going to my cousin's room and making up some lie about feeling sick and basically just crashing on the floor. I woke up the following morning and I thought that I must have been overtired or something and let my imagination get the better of me. I was still lying in my makeshift bed while everybody else was still asleep. I needed to use the toilet though, so I got up and walked out of the room. And in the corner of my eye, I saw someone sitting in the armchair in the living room. I immediately turned to look, but this time I saw this lady sitting there in the armchair staring blankly ahead, not noticing me looking. I remember her clear as day as well. Old, 85 to 90 years old I would guess, short white hair and a cream-colored dressing gown with slippers, and the most expressionless stare into just, well, nothing. I went straight into my cousin and woke her. She was irritated and told me to stop playing games with her, but when I went to look again, the lady was gone. About an hour or so passed, and I heard my aunt awake, making coffee. I went and told her what I saw quickly, and she said that she had seen her too. My cousins had not, though, but the fact that my aunt and I had seen her really creeped me out because, well, it sort of validated what I had gone through. Now, this is the part that gets really weird. Fast forward about 5 years, my aunt had moved out and she was living elsewhere, and that house became a distant memory. I was visiting my dad's place on the weekend, and we were talking about paranormal things, and I just so happened to mention my stepmother about the lady that I saw, and her eyes widened immediately. She said that it sounds very familiar to what she had experienced in a house that she lived in growing up. I mentioned the suburb, and she said the street. And yeah, it was the same house. My stepmother, her older brother, and her mother all described what I had seen as well. It was really crazy. But the creepy thing is that my aunt is my mother's sister and doesn't know my stepmother at all. I drove down that street recently, but the house has been knocked down since then. But I always wonder what happened to that lady, who she was, what was she after. She didn't seem evil, I guess, and my aunt said that she could feel someone brushing her gently while she slept in the house from time to time. Maybe she was just lonely. So I have a Labrador, and she has white-yellow fur, so I often see her in the dark, even in extremely low light. Last night at 3, I woke up for a drink, which is pretty rare for me. Usually my dog follows me everywhere, so I kinda didn't notice if she did in the middle of the night, but the room was occupied by me, my sister, who was sleeping on the other side of the room, and Kiki, my dog. When I turned from the kitchen, I saw what I thought was Kiki under my sister's bed, as she usually goes there to sleep anyway. I called for her and could see her eyes moving and staring at me. Dark eyes, a nose on all white fur, with dark background, so pretty visible in low light. I called for her a few times, but she didn't come out, but I could definitely see movement there, like she was moving her head towards me every time that I would call her, and then move it away after a while. After like 15 minutes, I noticed movement on the other side of the room's door from the small gap underneath, and it seemed like Kiki was trying to get my attention from behind the door without barking. She probably understands that everybody is sleeping, so she couldn't bark without it being an emergency. I don't know, but she was trying to get in from that gap. I got really confused, though, and immediately opened the door, and found Kiki was in the hallway this whole time. So I went back to see what was under the bed, and now there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the window was shut as the AC was on. I don't know what I saw that night, but there was definitely something under my sister's bed. I just hope that there's nothing to worry about, as this is my first experience in this apartment. It's new, but I don't know. I'm in the room right now with Kiki next to me on my bed. Naturally, I've been glancing where I saw it yesterday repeatedly and hoping to not see anything. And I guess my prayers were heard, because this time while cuddling, I heard a whisperish sort of "huh" right next to my ear. I usually always have my AirPods on at this time of night and would be listening to some random stuff, but I haven't been using them since the past 2 days, and now I wonder how many signs I might have missed in the past month that I've lived in this apartment. Anyway, like I said, I'm really not sure what I saw the other night, but whatever it was, I just hope that I don't see it again. When I was about 11 years old, I loved riding my bike. I could do it for hours, in fact. One day, I decided to go to the forest. It was near the village that I lived in, about 1 kilometer away. Around 40 meters away from it, I noticed something. It was something white in the grass on the left side of the road, under a rock. There was a piece of paper with a rock on it, and on the paper was written with charcoal, "Hello." As a dumb kid, I came back the next day. The piece of paper was still there, but when I got there, I also had a piece of paper with the word "Hi" written on it. Then I came back the next day too, and it was written on it, "How are you?" I had the paper and a pencil with me, and I wrote back, "I'm good, you?" Things were going really well. Once I tried staying there the entire day and night to find out who this dude was that was writing those little details. I told my parents that I would stay at a friend's house, but it was to no avail because nobody came. Time passed, and me and whoever this other person was sort of became really good friends. We would have these conversations, and we grew pretty close. One day, not intentionally, we just sort of stopped talking. I just came to the place less and less until eventually I stopped. The last letter that I remember this person writing was, "I'm going to miss you." Now, around 20 years passed, I'm 32, and I found written on paper with charcoal with a rock on top in front of my house, "Missed me" with a question mark. This just happened the other day, and this is my most sincere, what the heck? Nobody knows about this, so there's nobody that could play a prank on me. And I mean, what the heck, right? One day passed, I took the paper inside my house, left it inside my drawer, and to be honest, I'm really not sure what to feel about this. I'm sort of happy, I guess, that whoever this person is came back, but only if this person isn't some evil dude ready to, stalk and murder me. I don't think that they are, but what do you guys think? Plus, how did this person find me again? I'm an 18-year-old guy, and for countless years of my childhood, I experienced some, well, let's just say really weird stuff that I still can't understand. It's been on my mind constantly, and I'm not claiming that I saw Casper the Ghost or anything, but, man, let me just tell you everything. What I'm about to share with you guys is my full experiences in as much detail as I can remember them. I've only shared this with my close family. I mean, imagine me telling my friends this. No, it's not a fictional story, and I swear that this is real. So ever since I was a child, I would feel like I was being watched. As a result, I really couldn't sleep alone in my room. I would cry and cry to my parents to let me sleep in their bed. It worked most of the time, but sometimes I was forced to sleep alone. I would always place a large body pillow sort of next to me when I would sleep, so I didn't feel watched as much. My first encounter, though, came when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night, which I always did anyway, strangely enough. I took the large body pillow that was next to me and tried to place it on the other side of me, but when I lifted it, there was a woman standing next to my bed, a few meters away. It was really surreal, but I could sort of see through her, but I could still also see details. She was old, she had curly hair, she wore a shirt with buttons all the way down, and there were stripes on her shirt. I could see details all the way down to her waist, where all of a sudden it just sort of cut off. I screamed, ran past her, where my dad came rushing out of their bedroom to see what had happened. After this, I would wake up every single night for the next few years. Maybe it was because I was so alert all the time, but I think it's noteworthy to mention that. Now, I'm not sure about the timeline here, but a little after I got my next incident, an incident that would repeat itself for years on end too. I woke up like I always would around 2 or 3 in the night. This time, a white cloud kind of shaped like a human was standing at my door. It was stationary when all of a sudden it moved a little bit. I would sit there staring at it for like 30 to 60 seconds before it would always disappear into the roof. It would just kind of slowly float up, and after it went away, I would just quietly go to my parents' bed and sleep with them. This would happen at least for a year straight as well. And one time it was a little different though. I was sleeping in my own bed. I was probably 10 plus now, I would guess. I heard a female voice say hi to me. At first, I thought that it was my mother waking me up for school or something, so I'm pretty sure I said something like, "I'll get up soon." But something got me to open up my eyes, and it was standing there at my door, cloud shaped like a human. I remember saying a few words, but I couldn't say much because of fear. And after a minute, this thing floated up again, and then it was gone. Just a lot of strange stuff would happen too when I was like 10 or 12. Things would sometimes fall down in my room from my shelf at night, so loud in fact that my parents would hear it from their bedroom and come in to check on me. I don't remember this one too clearly as well, but one summer night, me and my brother were in the living room when he spotted some weird stuff in the garden. It was a cloud thing, sort of shaped like a human again, going back and forth. But this one was black though, and not white like I would always see. We called my father over and tried to point it out to him, but he couldn't see anything. My brother still brings this up like 7 plus years after this event. And at this point, I was so traumatized by this, to be honest, that when I was home alone, I would barricade myself into a room or something like that. One particular incident, though, just tops everything. I was sick at one point, home alone because my mum was at the store. I was playing CSGO in my brother's room, the old Nuke map if anyone knows the game, and a sculpture fell onto my face from above the PC. This wasn't too weird, but I got a little bit scared, so I left the room quickly. When I did, though, across the hallway in front of my room, I saw the cloud-shaped like person again. But it was going extremely fast towards the kitchen this time. I had never seen it move like this. In fact, I'd never really seen it in the day like this. So I slammed the door and jumped out the window, where I just waited for my parents. What I've noted is that all the activity of this thing would happen in front of my door. Our house is built pretty strange, it's sort of hard to explain, but my door is visible from almost everywhere in the house. In recent years, my oldest brother, who was very skeptical of my stories and would tease me, started talking about some weird experiences that he had too. He said that it was common for him to hear very heavy footsteps outside the bathroom when he was brushing his teeth at night. It was so heavy that he would feel the vibration in the floor, in fact. When he would check, nothing was ever there, and it just stopped, then started again a few minutes after. The bathroom is located just outside of my room, exactly where I would see this thing a lot. In the beginning of all of this, my parents thought that I was lying just to be sleeping in their room. But when I woke up every single morning to eat breakfast with them and I would be telling them what I saw last night, they started believing me more and more, I guess. Now, my grandmother died a few years before I was born. She would always talk about how excited she was to meet her grandkids. When I described the woman in my room, I was describing a large part of my grandmother, apparently. Curly hair, shirt with buttons and stripes on her shirt. Keep in mind, I had never seen a picture of her when I was that age, so I had no idea what she looked like. But at this point, I was practically begging my parents to get some help. They eventually contacted a guy that claimed to be able to get this thing away. My parents weren't buying it 100%, but they did it for me. I was told that I was too young to participate in whatever they were going to do, so I couldn't be there. I was told that he claimed that an entity was living in the kitchen, my room, and the living room. And apparently they sat in a circle and did some ritual before being charged $60. But, amazingly enough, after it all changed for me. I never felt watched again, I never saw anything again, and I could actually sleep in my own bed at night. I really don't know how to feel about this. I know what I saw countless times, but I just can't shrug it off. It's hard to live with for me, and I have a lot of questions about what all of that was. But anyway, it's all over now. Well, it seems to be, and I just hope that whatever this thing was, it doesn't come back. When I was a kid in the 90s, I would often sleep at my grandmother's house in the middle of a small village in the Jura region of France. The bedroom that I would stay in was called the room in the back. As the name suggests, it was one of the last two rooms at the end of a main corridor shaped like an L. There wasn't really anything special about that bedroom. It was pretty small and contained a bed, shelves with books, and some other basic furniture. Yet, for some reason, that room just always creeped me out. I felt an unwelcoming presence, and I would always struggle to fall asleep, scared of whatever invisible forces seemed to be lurking in the dark there. But one night there, though, when I was around 8 years old, I woke up scared and confused, because I found myself lying down on the floor and in total darkness. I feel I need to make two things clear here, though. This is the only time in my entire life that I have ever awakened outside of whatever bed or couch that I had been sleeping in. The second thing to note is that, despite the fact that the house is located in a small village, it wasn't particularly isolated, and the streetlights outside, they would always let a bit of light filter through the closed blinds at night. So, here I was, a child surrounded by total obscurity, struggling to understand why I wasn't in my bed. I tried my best to stay calm and touched around me, hoping to find the side of the bed nearby at least, so that I could climb back in. But I simply just couldn't find it. I tried for several minutes too, but it just didn't seem to be there, which was extremely strange considering that the bedroom wasn't that big in the first place. I therefore decided to move forward in a single direction to find a wall that I could then follow until I would find the bed. But things got even stranger as I tried to find a wall. I would bump into furniture that I would not recognize, and despite all my efforts, I simply just couldn't find one. Everything around me was completely and utterly unfamiliar. I thought about calling for help. My grandmother was sleeping in the bedroom on the other side of the corridor, and my parents in the living room. However, I imagined them finding me screaming on the floor, and in the end, I decided not to, not wanting to face that kind of embarrassment. Finally, I fell asleep on the floor, giving up on finding the bed. And I woke up the next morning in that bed and under the blankets. It was like the entire event had been nothing more than a really weird dream. Yet it just didn't feel like a dream. I am a natural lucid dreamer, and even back then I was already very familiar with how dreams feel, and it just wasn't one, or at least I don't think it was. Anyway, a few years ago, a long time after this strange occurrence, I went to England to visit my aunt, who's from the other side of my family. She claims to be a witch and is into a lot of New Age stuff. I've always been skeptical, but I have to admit that she's done and said a few strange things that got me to go from not believing her at all to being a bit more neutral about it, I guess. So we were talking about our respective families, and she went on about the only time when she had ever been in my grandmother's house when I was a baby. I thought that it was a good opportunity to see if she had sensed anything unusual there and asked her, making sure to keep the question open enough to not influence her. And the first thing she said was, yes, the room in the back. She said it in English and had no idea that we called it that way in French. There's something wrong in that room, she said. I was spooked. Once I got back to France, I decided to confront my mother about it, since she'd spent her childhood in that house, and as soon as I asked her what the heck was wrong with that room in the back, she froze and her face became white. She explained to me that when she was little, she went in that bedroom with a few friends and they tried to invoke spirits for fun one time. They sat down on the floor in a circle, holding hands, and said, "Spirit, if you're there, knock 3 times." And apparently they immediately heard 3 very violent knocks and ran off screaming. She told me that ever since then, the room has always felt weird. And that's it. Nowadays, the room is pretty different, but still used as a guest room. It still feels weird, but I'd say a lot less than when I was a kid. I know my brothers who are 10 years younger have also complained about feeling uncomfortable there for some reason, but they never had any unusual experiences there. Well, none like mine, anyway. I work in food service, front of house, so in the early days of the pandemic with restaurants closed, I was taking work wherever I could find it. An old friend clued me into a medical office that needed someone to come in and do a bit of light filing and stuff like that. I was able to go in at night to limit direct contact with people, so I jumped at the opportunity right away. Ironically, the medical office job had been the safest gig that I'd been offered thus far, COVID-wise anyway. I wanted to avoid the bus if I could, due to crowds obviously, so decided to swing for a rideshare app. It's not all that expensive in my area, and I really didn't want a virus. So I headed in at almost 3 a.m. because it was after the cleaning crew had left. I was kicking myself for being so cautious though, because I was exhausted. I stumbled onto the block looking for my ride, and to my tired self's great relief, the car spotted me almost immediately and pulled up asking Uber, while I cluelessly wandered up and down the street searching. The ride was taking a while, but I'd only just moved here last year, so I'm not that familiar with all of the surrounding areas and thought nothing of it. I was pretty alert at first, so was trying to pass the time playing games on my phone and stuff. But the car didn't have a compatible phone charger, and I wasn't sure the building would have one either, so I wanted to save my battery to be able to call a ride back. I shut my phone down into airplane mode and eventually drifted off from a combination of tiredness and boredom. I don't often take ride shares, so being alone with a strange driver often did put me on edge, but this guy had a pretty boring car and a very standard look about him. He looked a little like my brother even, I think. Young, clean-kept, listening to jazz, nothing that screamed, "You need to micromanage this trip." When we arrived, the driver tried to wake me up by calling to me from the front, but I was in too deep of a sleep and couldn't fully distinguish it from my dream. Finally, though, he awkwardly jimmied my leg to wake me up and kept saying, ma'am, we're here now." I was embarrassed that I'd been out of it, so I just gave a hurried thanks and booked it out of the car and into the building. But as I looked around, I began to realize that nothing was what I had expected of an office park. I had seen a street view of the building when I first looked up the business, and it had appeared to be a sort of strip mall plaza. And the further I went, the more loudly alarm bells were ringing in my gut. The structure was semi-dilapidated, and it was pitch black dark past the entryway. I expected some lights to be off in the nighttime, of course, but not the whole building like this. I skidded across the concrete foundation comprising what was left of the lobby area, told myself that they must be renovating or something, and followed the signs for the stairs. after what felt like ages but was likely just a few minutes, all I had passed was construction equipment, a couple of locked doors, and some smashed windows. I was certain that I was not going to find a medical office and figured that maybe I had mixed up the address or something. I took out my phone to double check, but once I got it out of the aeroplane mode, I could barely get a signal. I kept moving around in the building, pacing, looking for a stronger signal. I eventually confirmed in my text that I had written down the correct address just by scrolling back, which didn't require service, but since I'd only been inside for a few minutes at most, I figured that I should try and get in touch with the driver, because if I entered the correct address, then it was only fair that he should continue my ride to the correct place and save me the added fees of calling a second trip, considering this was all his mix-up after all. The app was taking forever to load with my slow service, but before I could get to a cloud of reception, I heard a rustling sound in the lower level of the building. I was on the top floor, and the only stairwell that I was aware of was the one that I had taken up, so it would force me into the middle of the building, and there was no way to exit the situation without encountering whoever was downstairs. In an abandoned building in the latest hours of the night, I figured the chances were high that it was a tweaker, and I had no desire to try slipping past a tweaker, that was for sure, especially when it was late enough that they were probably on something so jumpy and on edge. I tried to get a text out to a group of friends with my address and a request to call 911 to help get me off the property, because I didn't feel safe walking in that neighborhood at night, and didn't have enough reception to call a new ride too, but the message just wasn't sending. The reception was too weak. So I gave up on getting my phone going and started checking for another stairwell, or even window with balconies or dumpsters that could be used to exit the second floor as a last resort, in the event that whoever was downstairs came upstairs. I scrambled over to a door with a stairs sign on it, but the stairs were completely dilapidated, and it was essentially just a straight drop down to the first floor. At that point, the worst-case scenario began to unfold, because I heard whoever was downstairs begin making their way up the stairs. I thought fast and figured that, based on the walk about the floor, that it was basically a giant loop, so what I would have to do is wait for whoever this was to come up the stairs, wait for them to come all the way in, and then sprint the opposite direction of wherever they were going, and try to get down the stairs and out of the building in time to make it to the road without encountering them. I was not anticipating being chased or anything, but didn't want to anger off a druggie or have a homeless person who might be living there feel as though I'd trespassed and become hostile towards me, or have any sort of interaction that could possibly occur at that hour in an abandoned industrial park like this. So I held my breath for what felt like 5 minutes, I would guess, but it was probably just close to 30 seconds, and the person appeared at the top of the stairs. To my great relief, too, it was just the Uber driver. I figured that he would have come back for me, realizing that he had left me in the wrong spot, a place that could have worked out to be dangerous. So I came out from the beam that I was hidden behind and started to wave him down. But then I processed that there was no way for him to realize that this had been the wrong address. And at that, my stomach lurched forward and my blood chilled to slush. I made eye contact with him very briefly, and he was completely calm and composed, but breathing pretty heavily and blocking the stairwell down. On a normal, rational day, as an outside observer, I could think of a dozen innocent reasons that he might have returned, but in that moment, standing across from him like that, I just knew in my gut that this was someone with ill intent. I can't remember much from the ensuing few minutes, but operating solely on muscle memory and instinct, I Superman dove for the second stairwell's opening and just sort of let myself fall down the drop. Thankfully, I don't think that he saw where I'd gone at first, and though I was in too much pain to know it then, plenty was bruised, but nothing was completely broken, thankfully. I scrambled up and threw myself at anything that seemed like it could be the door. It was too dark to tell. I was so disorientated from the fall too, and I wasn't in a calm enough mindset to think to use my phone flashlight. Plus, in hindsight, some part of me probably knew that it would call too much attention to my location. Just before I was able to reach the door, though, it flew open with a blinding light beaming straight into my eyes. My first thought, though not totally coherent, was, there's another one of these guys, and I stumbled backwards trying to find something to hide behind. But before I could, a voice called out, "All right, this is the police. Everyone get on your knees with your hands in the air." I didn't believe that it was the police at first. I was in such a fight or flight mode and had already committed to flight that I continued to look for ways to get out. But he kept shining the flashlight right at me as I teetered around and yelled, "Hey, I said on the ground right now. Hands out where I can see them." He sounded so authoritative that I just sort of automatically did exactly as he asked. He approached me and finally shined the light away from me. It took a second to get my night vision, but once I did, I could see that he was really a police officer. First, he started asking me all these questions, and that, combined with what had just happened and my fear of the driver coming back, all snowballed into my being unable to form a single articulate sentence. He was even asking me questions like, "Can you tell me your name? Do you have any knives, needles, or anything that could poke or cut me? Would you rather talk in here or outside?" And my totally stunned babbling in response at first led him to believe that I was on something. He directed me out to his car, and once I was safely out of the building, I was able to start getting my bearings just a little. I sat on the edge of the back seat of the squad car with the door open facing out while he stood across from me and asked the same questions again. And the first thing that I could think to ask was, "Did my friends call you? What did they tell you?" And he explained no, nobody called him. He was patrolling the area and noticed a car idling outside of this building that's known to be condemned and nobody's supposed to be inside, and when they're there, they're not up to no good. He was launching into a speech about how if I'd gone to shoot up or meet a John, that he had resources that he could direct me to, and that this was not an ideal place to do either of these things, and asking if I had somewhere safe to stay that night. But I was stuck on something else that he'd said. Finally, it all clicked. The car. I spilled my whole rideshare story in a frantic word vomit. He looked around and, unfortunately, the car wasn't there anymore. The officer guessed that the guy had driven off while we were talking inside the building, and he asked me all the details that I remembered, and I told him, but there weren't many. I'd been too tired when the ride started to track much, but the officer realized that I could pull up my Uber app and get all the information. There wasn't really enough reception there, even outdoors, so we quickly sped down the road, and once I had enough bars, the app roared to life, and I had 4 missed notifications from Uber. They said, "Hello, I've arrived, and I don't see you. Can you confirm the pickup address is correct?" And I'm flashing my hazards. And finally, unfortunately, your driver had to cancel. At first I thought that the driver was so cunning as to pick me up while sending these fake messages and cancelling so the GPS wouldn't track us, knowing that I wouldn't notice because I was asleep with my phone off, and exonerating himself. But instead I checked the car details, checked again, and I noticed that it definitely was not the same driver. What I mean is that the person who had driven me here, they had not been my Uber. My driver was somewhere else on the street when this guy pulled up to get me. The police took my statement and said that they would keep an eye out for the guy, but the best that I could give them to go off of was basically young-looking Caucasian man with brown hair, sideburns, goatee, and 4-door sedan, wearing a zip-up sweatshirt, but maybe had a hood, which is like 1 out of every 4 guys in this city. In the end, though, I feel very fortunate to have survived this near miss. Suffice it to say, too, I do not take rideshare services anymore. So this isn't my story, it's actually my dad's. Around 40 years ago, when my dad was still in college, he moved quite a ways from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam to New Haven, Connecticut for college. He had already received the Form I-20 and went to the consular at the US Embassy to try and get an M student visa. He was a first-generation immigrant, and though he had taken a fair amount of English classes in Vietnam, he wasn't fluent and knew nothing about housing in America and all that stuff. This is why he went the cheap route and rented out an apartment somewhere near Pine Tree Drive in West Haven. His landlord, as he told me later, gave off some serious red flags though that he sort of brushed off because the apartment was only $250 a month. Now firstly, the landlord's abode was directly next door to that of my dad's, and during his first night there, while he was getting unpacked, he heard a high-pitched screeching and a sort of weird opera music. Again, he brushed it off for the same reason I said earlier, and also because he was very tired. The next morning, when he awoke, he noticed a chair by his bed that wasn't there before, though, and when he went to the bathroom, his toilet seat was up, though he recalled putting it down, and not only that, his door was unlocked. He again brushed it off, though, because he didn't want to stir up anything with his landlord by asking if he had come into his room, or by asking if he had been broken into, therein referring that the apartment was insecure. He also wanted to explore West Haven, as his college year didn't begin until late August. He had come 3 weeks early, and as he left, he specifically remembered locking his door behind him. But when he returned after a few hours out, he noticed that not only had the door been unlocked, but it was actually slightly ajar. This went on for weeks until his college year began, and things slightly moved from where he had left them, and articles of food were missing from his fridge, and other weird stuff like this. Finally, though, my dad had had enough, and one night he decided to stay awake until very late and try to catch whoever was doing this red-handed. That night he finished his homework and then got into bed, but he laid there and just remained awake. And sure enough, at around 2 a.m, he sees his door handle turning and a hand sliding through. My dad froze, his blood ran cold, and he then saw the landlord creep in and take some eggs from the fridge. But not only that, the landlord then went to the bathroom, coming out a couple of minutes afterwards, and he then slipped out once again, leaving the door unlocked. This creeped my dad out big time, which is understandable, right? But for some stupid reason, he still decided to stay at the apartment for a few more nights before he finally confronted the landlord. Money and wanting to save does some stupid things to the brain, I guess. But this was before mobile phones and even decent cameras that didn't cost like $100+, and so my dad had literally no way to get evidence to show to the cops besides mere accusations. The next night, he once again heard the odd screeching and weird opera music coming from his landlord's room, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. That weekend, when his landlord went out shopping, he broke into his landlord's room, and what he found there was seriously disturbing. First of all, he found some sort of weird sex doll, but when he investigated further, he found an old Kodak camera. And under this was some extremely low-quality pictures of my dad in bed sleeping. Well, he noped out of there real quick, taking the pictures with him, and went to the police station. He moved out of there shortly after, and he later heard that this same landlord had scared other residents off the apartment after hearing the odd screeching and opera music, and after seeing all of their things moved around like he did. The building my dad lived in was since torn down, and my dad decided to just dorm at Sigma Chi. He had at first opted to stay away from fraternities because of the heavy partying and stuff like that, but in the end he just decided to put up with it. We never knew what happened to the landlord, only that he would be facing some prison time, and I seriously hope that he was never allowed to be a landlord again because, man, that is creepy. When I was 13, my family moved into a home in a nice neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. It was a relatively new build, 2002, and was a part of a very nice subdivision. I lived in the house from the age of roughly 13 to 19, but there was a year in college dorms in the middle. No one had passed away in the house, that I could find anyway, and overall, it didn't have any of those sort of haunted house red flags or anything. Also, for context, although I am currently not very religious, I grew up in an extremely Christian religious family. So the entire time that I lived in this house, I had horrible nightmares, to the point where I was scared to go to sleep. My parents would sort of play it off like it was nothing. My parents were on one side of the house and had their own bathroom. On my side of the house, it was just me and no one used my bathroom. And at night, I would hear the sink was on and the toilet was flushing. But no one was ever in the bathroom when I looked, and I tried to play it off like it was nothing. I would also hear scratching in the attic relatively frequently. My childhood house had a stray cat that lived in our attic, so I quickly explained that away as likely some sort of an animal, even though it was a newer house with a sealed attic and we never found any animals. I thought all of this was happening to me, but eventually my mum and dad started talking about footsteps that they heard at night. My mum said that they would walk around the house, but she didn't feel any negative energy, so she thought that maybe it was an angel or deceased loved one protecting us. Insert eye roll here at the angel comment, but my dad said the footsteps happened every night. And I stayed awake one night, and yeah, it sounded like someone shuffling through the house. Now, all of this seemed like pretty harmless activity, until one night in my late teens. It was on this night that I woke up to find my bedroom door closed. I had a mirror on the back of my bedroom door, and I always was afraid of seeing something in that mirror, so I kept the door open and the hall light on. Everyone in the house knew about my obsession with keeping the door open, and later, when I asked about it, no one in my family said that they shut my door. Upon seeing the door shut, though, I immediately panicked. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and tried not to look in the mirror. I opened the door, took a deep breath, and I walked back to my bed. I remember thinking something like, this is the part of the horror movie where I get attacked, right? And then I laid my head down on my bed. Now, I know this next part people are going to call fake and say it didn't happen, but I know without a shadow of a doubt that this happened to me, and I can't explain it to save my life. So the second that I laid down my head, it was like the covers were just pulled up over my face and someone was holding them down over my head. It honestly felt like hands were all over my body, pinning me down, and I felt like I was burning all over too, and I could hear the sound of like firewood burning in my ears or something like that. I could also hear like something like laughing, and I couldn't move, and I felt like I was about to die. Regardless of your views on religion too, all I could think to do at the time was just pray. I don't know if I prayed out loud or really loud in my head or something, but I said something like, "In the name of Jesus, stop," 3 times. I remember very specifically on the 3rd time too. Everything just all of a sudden evaporated. My house was quiet, there was nothing holding me down any longer, and I just ran. I bolted into my parents' room, covered in sweat and sobbing. My dad said that it was just a nightmare, but I got angry and yelled at him for not listening to me this time. I wouldn't go back into my room, and my mum took it a little more seriously, thankfully. The next day, she had the house anointed, or whatever it's called, and prayed over. And after that, everything stopped. The footsteps, the nightmares, the toilet flushing, everything. We did eventually move out of that house, and nothing like that ever happened again, thankfully, but it seems that everywhere I go since then, weird stuff still happens to me, sort of periodically, but not at that scale, that's for sure. Like I said, I'm not super religious anymore, but this is one of those things that I just really can't explain. I can't offer any logical explanation for what happened. All I know is that it did.